Wow, this hall feels familiar, and Makarand, of course, is very familiar. So, welcome everyone. And I'm really delighted that Raja Rao is being discussed. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing Makarand Paranjape. He is very well known in these parts, having come to Houston so often. One of India's foremost intellectuals, public intellectuals, author, poet, professor, and currently director of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla. Next time you go to India, make sure you say hi to him in India, IIAS. It's a fabulous place to be. So today we are discussing Raja Rao, a man of silence, remembering Raja Rao. And this man of silence phrase comes from his own speech that he gave when he was, while accepting Neustadt Prize, International Prize. And he said, "I am a man of silence, and words emerge from that silence with light, of light, and light is sacred." So today we're just going to see between the silences if we can decipher the man. Thank you, Makarand, for being here. So the trio, as we know, R.K. Narayan, Mulk Rajanan, and Raja Rao, the pioneers, if you will, of Indian writing in English. And all three of them were quite aware of Indians writing in English. Raja Rao definitely was, as you know. What struck me was when you wrote a tribute to him when he passed away in 2006, and I will quote you, you said, "Truly, he was the greatest writers of 20th century." You didn't say the usual trope, greatest Indian writers writing in English. I thought we'll just start from there because I thought that was fascinating. I agree with you, but I want to say, why did you do that? If you could elaborate.
Thank you, Sunanda. It's great to be back here. I want to, before I say anything,
yes, please.
Thank the sponsors of this session, Vijay and Marie Goradia. I want to thank JLF. I want to thank the Indian Consul General, Dr. Anupam Ray. I want to thank you, and I want to thank all of you, fit audience though few, as Milton said at the beginning of Paradise Lost, to come to the smallest beautiful part of our parallel sessions. The reason we should be talking about Raja Rao is that he belongs to Texas. It's something that very few people know. He lived for the latter part of his life in Austin, and he passed away in Austin in a small garage apartment on Pearl Street, quite close to the university where he had taught for 20 years as a professor of philosophy, which was itself quite extraordinary because he had no degrees. He had a BA from Aligarh Muslim University, then he dropped out. In fact, he had registered for a PhD
degree in France.
In France at Montpellier, and then he dropped out. He didn't finish his PhD. And the topic of the PhD was really fascinating. We can come to that later. But I'm talking a little bit about Raja Rao before I answer your question, because I gather intuitively that most people haven't heard of him.
Yes. I was going to do a poll here. How many of you have read Raja Rao, not heard?
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's
I'm
more
impressed.
than what I expect. Yes.
I'm really impressed.
Yes.
Because what happens is, sometimes great writers pass away and they don't even leave a ripple behind. And when you make a claim that he was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, and many people haven't heard of him, then there's a mismatch.
Yes.
That's why I thought I'd say just a few words about him and his extraordinary life. So he drops out of his PhD and takes to writing seriously in the 1930s. And his first stories are in Kannada, in his native language, Kannada, and were published in Jaya Karnataka back in India. And then he starts writing in English, and he invents a new kind of English, long before Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie talked about the chutnification of English. But Raja Rao in Kantapura, the first novel, written of his published in 1938.
And he was all of 21.
He was
probably.
right. He was born in 1908.
Yeah.
So in 1938, he was just over 20.
Just over 21, and he wrote Kantapura, which is
It's an
considered
extraordinary, exactly. And see, that's the time when the 30s, when Mulkraj Anand also wrote Coolie, and R.K. Narayan wrote Swami and Friends. All of these were published in the 30s, 35, and then 37 and 38, around that time. In fact, 33, Untouchable, the first novel by Mulkraj Anand. So they're all written in the 30s, and all of these writers lived to be nearly 100 years old. But then, so Kantapura was about the freedom movement and how it played out in a small town in Karnataka, where there was a Gandhi-like figure, and he revolutionized that village. But really, the hero was a young widow, yes. And she rebelled against, the authorities, the colonial authorities. And anyhow, the modern Indian English novel was born in the 30s with these three great masters. And then Raja Rao moved on to writing very different kinds of novels, notably Cat and Shakespeare, also a novel called Serpent and the Rove, which was his great opus. But the Cat was written earlier, published later.
Okay.
There's a story, it was first written in French, then translated into English, and then he wrote, some other books, mostly about India. He knew Jawaharlal Nehru well. He knew Mahatma Gandhi. He spent some time in Wardha, in Sevashram there. But anyhow, and then his life took a completely different turn when his first marriage to Camille Mooley dissolved. And they were both looking for the Guru. And they went to Raman Maharishi's ashram in Tiruvannamalai. And Raja Rao told me the story himself, where when he prostrated to Ramana, he felt he hadn't found what he was looking for. And the stone floor, it was the granite stone floor, laid with slabs of granite, was actually drenched with his tears, And when he looked up, see, Ramana hardly spoke, so the silence is a recurrent metaphor in his work. And he told, and Raja Rao said, I'm going to Kerala to see Atmananda Guru. And the Maharishi blessed him. So when Raja Rao spoke to me about this, he said he knew that he would find his master because Ramana had pointed him. And then I said, why? Why is that? He said, Ramana took no devotees and disciples. He was the absolute himself. And I needed the human touch. I needed a guru who could guide me, with whom I could have a conversation. So he finds Atmananda Guru, and he lives in Trivandrum for a few years, actually, and a trunk full of his manuscripts go missing there. But then he shows up in the 1960s without a PhD and these few books, and he gets a professorship of philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin. And he has the largest classes in the university. I mean, it's hippie time. It's hippie time, as it were, in the US. And the classes have no structure. And I asked him, what was your pedagogic philosophy? And he laughed. He said, I would stand, it was a large lecture room with at least 200 students. There was no attendance. People could come and go as they pleased. And I would focus on my guru, he said, and I would start by asking them, you can ask me any question you like, any question at all. That's how the classes started. And I said, suppose you didn't know the answer. He said, I thought of my guru and the answer always came. Anyhow, now here's the point. I'm now going to answer your question, or try to. There's a treasure trove of unpublished Raja Rao manuscripts sitting at the Harry Ransom Humanities Research Center.
Which has been acquired by University of Texas at Austin.
In fact, it was donated. See, when Raja Rao died, like Gandhi, he had very few things left. You could spread them out on the floor, as his wife Susan said to me. And he really lived the quintessential life of an author in the modern world, but in the Vedic mold. He owned nothing, he had no property, and he lived for the word, and he lived for the silence that informs the word. Anyhow, So those who have had a look at those manuscripts know that his last book, his great novel, was called The Chess Master and His Moves. It was published, in the 1990s. It got the Neustadt Prize. But the point is that it's only the first of a trilogy. So this is a huge novel which deals with the 20th century, which is the most violent century in human history. And like the Buddha, he tries to answer the question of why we suffer. And the novel breaks the boundaries of language, civilization, nation, community, religion, and transcends. That's why I call it one of the great novels. And at the heart of it is this conversation between the Brahmin and the rabbi as prototypical of two ancient civilizations and two ways of understanding the world, which Raja Rao calls the vertical, I should point this way, the vertical and the horizontal. We can talk a little more about it. Yeah. So to finish the point, I think that when these unpublished works come out, and there's many other books lying there waiting to be resurrected, and the entire oeuvre of Raja Rao comes into the common daylight, and when scholars and lovers of literature examine that and the entirety of the corpus of Raja Rao, I think he will go down with Proust or with the other D.H. Lawrence or other great
writers of his time,
or James Joyce of the 20th century. One of the great writers of the 20th century who tried to go to the depths of trying to understand the human condition itself.
That's fascinating. And we will talk about, you brought the archives, and we will towards the end, we'll talk about how you are involved with it and how you spent some time in University of Texas at Austin looking through those, and you've written about it. We'll go back to it. But I want to focus a little bit about Raja Rao's work. So you have Kanthapura, and you have Serpent and the Rope. Cat and Shakespeare. I was just talking about these two because they were published first, and then you go to, and the reason I say these two first, because there is some semblance of a story. And as you move forward in his work, it becomes more abstract. He becomes a lot less accessible to an ordinary reader. And as we were discussing last night, he is not your bedtime read at all. And Cat and the Shakespeare also, at that time, did not receive the best of reviews. Could that be one of the reasons why Raja Rao remains not in how he meant a man of silence, but he remains in darkness?
See, Raja Rao did not follow trends. He set trends. And you see the problem with us is that we are very comfortable with mediocrity. And if someone really challenges that mediocrity, it creates a cognitive dissonance. So Raja Rao wrote a book called Comrade Kirillov, which very few people have read. I've read it and written on it. In fact, I've written on most of his books. And he predicts the demise of communism. Now, that's not a very popular thing to say 20, 30 years before the fall of the Soviet Union, especially when the literary elite is very left-leaning for whatever reasons. And the real point is, to go back to your question, Raja Rao is a metaphysical novelist. And he believes that it is only in metaphysics that the solution to the human condition lies. Because no amount of material progress or satisfaction, which he calls the horizontal way, accumulation, addition of knowledge, and improvement, trying to perfect the human condition, which is what, in a way, human evolution is about. Social evolution, political evolution, the evolution of institutions, and now, climate change, whatever it is. We're trying to save things. We're trying to safeguard the environment, the planet, and trying to, get things better and better. And he says, no amount of that gradual, accumulative, incremental improvementalism is going to satisfy us. That is the basic thesis. And that's why you come to the vertical axis, where he says only a sheer, rejection, as it were, of that quest and the realization, what he calls the abhuman. What he calls the abhuman means the negation. You have to radically negate, metaphysically, what we take as the normal human condition to find the solution. So, and that is Advaita for Raja Rao.
Advaita was the philosophy that Raja Rao followed and was a student of. Advaita comes straight from Shankara himself, Adiguru Shankara.
In a way, Advaita it doesn't come from anywhere.
Was one of the greatest masters of Advaita was...
Exactly. But it's
Shankara.
radical non-dualism.
Yes.
We don't have to contextualize it in the conventional philosophical way, because he was an artist. That's my point.
Yeah.
So, and a storyteller and a writer and not a philosopher. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to embody Advaita as this worldly, not an otherworldly philosophy, which gives you the clue to understanding yourself and understanding the problem of human suffering. And the point is that if you agree that ultimately that's what, in fact, modern art, modern literature was trying to do. If you just think about that great painting of Edward Munch, The Scream, which in some ways represents the terrible agony at the heart of the modern condition, then I think it is the Advaita that Raja Rao tries to portray in his work, which is the answer to that anguish, which is at the heart of the modern condition, which I think all of us have had a glimpse of, and what the existentialists tried to counter, and the other, from Heidegger, when he says he wanted the gods to return, when Max Weber talked about the disenchantment of the world. So how do you re-enchant the world? You can't do it with tribalism of different kinds and the worship of little gods, so to speak.
Yeah.
You have to do it, in a sense, by a transformation of consciousness. And Raja Rao, in a way, is showing you how this is done in his books.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that those who thirst deeply for answers will find in his books something that is lacking in much of what we encounter. As Frederick Jameson says in The Postmodern Condition, there's a plasticity and a fakeness, a superficiality, a lack of depth to our lives. There's a modular repetition, as he says in the paintings of Marilyn Monroe that Andy Warhol did. There's a replication, repetition, a lack of depth, and a lack of meaning in much of what we have created in the name of modernity. Yeah. And this is true is as true of Beijing, as it is of New York or wherever. Yeah. Wherever we go, we find similar structures where there is an erosion of meaning and purpose. And humankind is obviously at a crossroads now.
True.
And the planetary crisis is upon us. So transform or perish, that's the only option.
You talked about mediocrity, and a lot of us come from that space, not you, but so coming from that space, there is, critics and readers and consumers of literature, we fall back on very, those tropes or those ropes that help us. So when I talk to a lot of people who have read Raja Rao, amongst a whole who haven't, but a few of people, suddenly there is this need to make him Pandit Ravi Shankar of English literature, in the sense that he brought English literature, Indian English literature written by an Indian language, writers who were writing in English, bring them on the international stage, which is true. He did that. A lot of his writing did get international praise. But I don't think when I read Raja Rao, he himself was working towards it or wanted to do it. For him, India was never really, as we all know, a place. It existed in the mind and everyone could access India. You just had to know the philosophies or you just had to do the sadhana, as he called his writing. So, do you think it's very lazy to put him in this East-West trope or say that here he is, a rock star of English literature, bringing it on the map of India? That was none of those things preoccupied his mind.
This is a very interesting paradox in Raja Rao. When you read his letters, he's always writing to heads of state. He wrote to Indira Gandhi, he wrote to Morarji Desai. He was always writing to them. He was deeply interested in Indo-US relations. He somehow felt that India had made a mistake in tilting towards the Soviet Union. He wanted, he felt that the United States, which stood for liberty, and India also stood for radical freedom of the metaphysical kind, were natural allies. So, paradoxically, he was always trying to intervene in the world by writing and developing deep relationships. He had a deep relationship with André Marleau, and he wanted a French connection as well with India. He was concerned with matters of world peace, with nuclear disarmament and the Cold War. So he was very engaged with the world, but from a very different perspective. I think this is what's really important when we try to understand Raja Rao, because for him, he told me, when I was a graduate student, he happened to come and give a lecture in a class, and then there was a kind of social gathering at the home of the Professor Braj Kachru, the late Braj Kachru, of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I was a student. And Raja Rao sat on this mahogany chair, a very small, frail man, and people carried on with their chit-chat and hors d'oeuvres and drinks. And I went and sat next to him, and he said, "What do you want?" And it was one of those questions. I said, "What do you mean, what do I want?" I'm a graduate student, I want to graduate, I want to get a degree. He says, no, what do you really want? Then he says, what do we really want, So now, the point I'm trying to make is that the way Raja Rao lived his life is that he did what he felt was his true calling, and he had incredible faith that the Guru would do the rest. And he believed that all of us had to get connected to this entity. You may call him the actual, or it, or she, the actual Guru, or that consciousness, and then that would lead us. And that's why he called, his great novel, The Chess Master and His Moves, because he said, you don't move, you're not an agent. You think you're an agent, but there's something else that is moving you. And when you understand that, then everything manifests in its own time. And his novels also, the story of their publication is almost miraculous. Even The Serpent and the Rope, nobody wanted to publish it. And E.M. Forster, was passing by. There was, John Murray, who was trying to start a new publishing house. And E.M. Forster had a flat in Cambridge. And John Murray passed by and then retracted his steps, and knocked on Forster's door and said, I'm starting a new publishing house. Do you have any books for me? And Forster said, as a matter of fact, I do. Here it is. And then The Serpent and the Rope was published like that.
Hasn't Forster also said that he is one of the finest writers of 20th century?
He has indeed. So anyhow, to finish the point is to find that sweet spot where, you have to give up, in some ways, every care and concern about the immediate or about the practical if you want to be a great writer. This is what Raja Rao told me. He says, I didn't care for anything else, I only cared to write. That was my sadhana. And everything else happened as if on its own. And many times, any one of us might have experienced it. There are moments when everything is in a flow. You don't have to do anything. You're, as it were, being carried unconsciously to the next place, and everything is so beautiful. And then you fall back upon yourself, upon agency and the anxiety of success and failure and all the rest of it. And in a way, Raja Rao's novels are taking us from that ordinary level of consciousness. As we read, we are slowly being, in a way, shown another way to be. And I think that why I consider his novels or his work to be literary classics is that as long as human beings are looking for another way to be, Raja Rao will be one of the people they will turn to, especially because he talks about the difficulties of how to be in this particular world. And he lived through the wars, he saw the horrors of the Holocaust, and he understood the modern condition in a way that very few did. And he still wants to foreground and mainstream the Vedantic way, and in a way a kind of Buddhism also, where he's basically saying the denial of this horizontality, where you live through time, you're born and you die, let's say, and that vertical, the sheer vertical rise to the absolute, is the only way we can, as it were, recover our true identity with the vastness, which is what we are. And basically, he's trying to show you how it can be done, what kind of institutions can be built, which can support that, what sort of social arrangements are needed for that vertical ascent of humanity, where you can negate time as well. I mean, and because there's an intersection of the vertical with the horizontal. So at every moment, and that's why he says India is not concerned with chronology. You don't know historical dates in India. You don't know when Kalidas was born. You don't know anything about Bharata. And you talked about Shankara, but we know very little about Shankara.
Chronology
you know nothing. Actually, I've done a little bit of work on Shankara. All the Shankara Digvijayas were written many years after he supposedly lived. And if you go to the official...
Even Shankara's dates of when he was is a battlefield.
Look at the Sringeri mud. They say Shankara was born in 2000 BC.
Yeah, it's a battlefield.
Nobody knows. So then he says, is it because Indians were stupid? He says no. What he said is that, things don't unfold chronologically at all. So there is an ideal alignment of forces. And you create a society through that ideal alignment of forces. And when it's destroyed, you create it again. Then it's destroyed, you create it again.
The cyclical nature of it.
Well, I don't want to go there, because I'm just saying that in human history, people have tried to create that ideal moment. Gandhi called it Ram Rajya. But it gets destroyed. But that doesn't matter. You pick yourself up and try again and again. So what he's saying is that Indian civilization has repeatedly tried to create an ideal society, which can only happen when there is that convergence, of political institutions and wisdom. And so there's nothing to be worried when these things are destroyed, because again you'll try and create it, and again you'll create it, and again you'll try to create it. And if it's destroyed, because there's no growth, there's no development, there's no progress. Progress is an illusion. Now we may not agree, because we are so fixated on technological progress. But what he's really saying is, of course, you'll get better gadgets, you'll get AI, but with AI, again you want to create that moment of perfection.
And then you'll go back. Then you'll go back.
And again
you'll go back.
And if the human race is destroyed, that's okay.
That's fascinating.
That's all right. There's nothing to be worried about.
Yeah.
Because the infinite intelligence of the cosmos will once again find different ways. And so, you see, as Mircea Eliade said, what the Vedic people or the Hindus or the Indic people were trying to do is through their art, through their craft, through their social arrangements, through their temple, through their worship, they were constantly trying to replicate that originary moment, you know, when the one entity split itself up into the many, and they were constantly trying to get back to that moment so that, you know, that joining can happen again. So over and over again. So the yajna is just that. See, when you have a yajna, you're again, through a certain process, trying to create that harmony of heaven and earth, so to speak. In fact, there are 3 levels, you know, because we're coming to the end of our time, I think. So there is the human level, there's the natural level, that is human beings are a part of nature, and then there's the world of the gods, or the world of the super, whatever, natural, whether you believe it or not. And an ideal world exists when all the 3 are in harmony. And every effort of human civilization is to get them into harmony. And we do it over and over again. We achieve it from time to time. Then we fail. Then we try and bring it back together. And technology changes. And, you know, building materials change. Texts change. Languages change. But that original impulse of the human being to replicate that order where the 3 are in harmony
will stay. That's brilliant. We unfortunately don't have much time, and I wanted to ask a lot of questions, but maybe that will come in question answer and we can talk about that. But I want you to give us a brief this anecdotes of how you got involved with Raja Rao's legacy, so to speak, or the unpublished manuscripts that I remember seeing you here. You spent considerable amount of time one summer in UT Austin working on that. So give us a sense of how you got introduced to it, how you got pulled in that project, and what is the state of that project now?
Right. So here's where we sort of bring in Susan, who is the real hero, because she, you know, put all of this together and gave it to the University of Texas. But I had seen this material when he was alive.
Okay.
I was one of the 5-7 people who were privileged to read these books. And then he passed on, and all this got scattered. They had to give up that home. But now it's in a safe place, and anyone can look at it. And now, I mean, Susan asked me to help. And so in other words, she's the director. I'm just the sevak. I'm the servant, you know, of this.
And Susan still lives in in Austin.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm just following her orders, so to speak. And the first plan, we've actually signed a contract with Penguin. I'm a kind of pro bono or voluntary editor. She's the owner of everything. I'm helping. And first we want to start by republishing 2 of his really wonderful books. One is on Gandhi. It's a very interesting book he wrote on Gandhi, or The Great Indian Way. This came out again in the 1990s. We're reprinting it with a new introduction. And then a wonderful book called The Meaning of India, where he says India is not a desha, but a darshana. And so we'll start with the reprint, and then we want to bring out a small book, you know, of philosophical essays. He wrote lots of these really brilliant essays. And one of them is called The Barren Woman's Son. Now, this is a conundrum in Advaita philosophy. And other essays. So we're re-editing this material. And then hopefully that will come out. And then eventually the trilogy, which is the hardest, the Chessmaster trilogy.
Only one was published in his lifetime, and two more are there.
That's
They're
going to be
unpublished.
the hardest, and maybe this will take 20 years.
So all you Raja Rao lovers, take a trip to UT Austin, go through all this, and see if any one of you can help. I mean, I guess if there is one takeaway from this, probably that should be the takeaway. Or if you can support those like Makarand who are helping in this, I think that would be one of our humble tributes to the greatest writer of the 20th century. We won't say one of the greatest writers of 20th century. Market true. True, absolutely true. And I would like to open it to questions now. So just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you. The way I like it is just briefly say your name so that we know who we are talking to, and questions only, no statements, just questions so that, and brief. So the only reason I say that is so that we can move to get more questions also. And Makarand will be here after this also, so you can just sort of talk to him later also. Any hands in the audience? Anybody who wants to ask a question? Here, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. The question I have is, for those of us who have not read him, what book would you recommend as the easiest way into his literature?
Very good question. I love The Cat in Shakespeare. It's like a fable, and it's very easy to read, you know. And it's really about, you know, in Vashisht Advaita, you have the way of the cat and the way of the monkey. You know, Marjara Nyaya and Markata Nyaya. So what happens is the little baby monkey clings to the mommy because it's afraid of falling. But the kitten, you know, is like just completely surrenders. And the mother picks up the kitten. And then, so the whole thing is that you do a lot of work with your mind and you're struggling so much. But there's a point, the point where you meet the guru, where you just surrender. And the beauty of that surrender and the magical world that unfolds once you reach that spot is what that book is about. And it's a bit of a cock and bull story, but it's full of all kinds of quirks, but it's very short. Yeah. And I think it's a delightful read.
I agree. My personal favorite was Kanthapura, and I cannot get over the fact that he wrote it when he was 21. I just cannot. At 21, I don't know what I was doing. Any more questions? There, we'll go to this side of the lady in there. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Just Sunanda, the book comes out when he's close to 30, you know, 1938.
Okay.
Born in 1908. But it was written in his 20s, okay, for sure. So it wasn't quite published when he was 21. And his first stories also start coming out. I think there's a hum. Yeah. They start coming out, you know, in, the early 30s. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have to just do these things. And the fact is, you know, when they say that when you take one step towards, say, the guru is taking 2 steps towards you. So one of, Sunanda was going to ask me a question about Raja Rao as a guru. Yeah. Actually, he turned out to be like, and you know, here's the real thing, that I asked him this, and he says, I'm not the guru, I'm the upaguru. So I just take people and their discontent and lead them, I channel it towards the absolute.
Doesn't he also differentiate between a sage and a saint?
Totally. So the saint is somebody who seeks moral perfection. Yeah. But the sage is one who embodies wisdom. Yeah. And again, he says that this is the horizontal versus the vertical. And that's why he's saying that, and he has a lot of respect for the vertical, for the horizontal as well, which is the Hebraic, which is the infinity, the quest for infinity, as opposed to the quest for the zero. Zero is the vertical, where, you know, through radical dissolution of the ego, you find, not the perfection of the ego, which in a way Freud also wanted. etc., etc. So it's very profound. So to go back to your question, I mean, you have to do it. There's no, in a way, in the doing of it, the next step is going to be shown to you.
Yeah.
Not in the telling of it, in the actual. But I mean, his books, I find his books always push me back to myself. So among the modern writers, there are two for me. One poet, Sri Aurobindo, in English, I'm talking about English, and one fiction writer who in a sense managed to bring that vast spiritual energy of India, which was supposed to be India's great gift to the world, into literature in a way in which hardly anybody else managed. And they didn't do it in that broken apologetic way that T.S. Eliot did in The Wasteland, where through fragments you want to, recoup something that's lost, whatever it is that's lost. Here it's done in a very easy and also in a wondrous, in a glorious way. So the enchantment is there. So when I start reading Raja Rao, immediately, there is a kind of energizing of the spirit that happens just through his incredible style. If we had time, I would read you passages, but there's hardly any time.
Just as he said, writing is sadhana for him. So I suppose reading is also sadhana. It goes both ways. Questions from this side? Anybody? Yes, please. The lady in... The microphone is coming to you, please. And then I'll come to you, sir, right after that.
Yeah, I have not read any of Raja Rao's work, but just from listening to you, thoughts floating in my head is that is his philosophy similar to Gautama Buddha, like Buddhism, enlightenment and reflecting, and kind of go within yourself and analyze stuff like that?
Yes, very much. It's very much on those lines. Of course, he engages with all the whatever existing philosophies of his time, which means Buddhism, Vedanta, Bhakti, Marxism, existentialism, socialism, capitalism, materialism, whatever it is, whatever the isms were. So he's a very, as I said, intellectual novelist at one level. But eventually, you have to push things towards that moment of breakthrough. And if you're not quite doing that, you just intellectualize, your life, or suffering, or whatever it is that is driving your quest. But in Raja Rao, the moment you dip into his world, what's happening is you're being propelled to a state of intolerable discontent and curiosity at the same time. So the work is itself driving you somewhere, which will, I suppose, if taken to its, termination or taken to its extreme, produce some kind of breakthrough. That's why I think that the praxis implied in the reading of Raja Rao is what makes him unique. It's not as if you're going to read a Raja Rao book, from the comfort of a detached space, and then just return to being whatever it is you're doing, being yourself or whatever. The book is going to pull you out and then insert you into another world where characters are deeply immersed and deeply incensed and deeply, you might say, obsessed with certain questions. And those questions resonate with our own lives. And they include questions of love, questions of finding, your perfect partner, all these things which all of us think about as ways of transforming our lives.
Tussle with. It's only an illusion if we were to talk about Raja Rao's, using his vocabulary. It's only an illusion if you think that I'm running this show. I'm not. It's Selena who's running the show, and she's already told me the time is up. So I thank you so much for being here. I know there were more questions. Makarand, if after this you could be here for a few minutes and you could answer the questions after that so that we can leave this room. But thank you, Makarand, thank you so much. We've had such wonderful conversations together, but this definitely is the best. And thank you to you, wonderful people who have come here and supported this whole thing. Thank you so much.